I tell you that the mere murderer is not therefore a sinner. That is true, but the sinner is sometimes a murderer. Gilles de Rais is an instance. So you see that while the good and the evil are unnatural to man as he now is, to man the social, civilized being, evil is unnatural in a much deeper sense than good. The saint endeavors to recover a gift which he has lost. The sinner tries to obtain something which was never his. In brief, he repeats the fall. "But you are a Catholic?" said Cosgrave. "Yes, I am a member of the persecuted Anglican Church." "Then how about those texts which seem to reckon as sin that which you would set down as a mere trivial dereliction?" "Yes, but in one place the word sorcerers comes in the same sentence, doesn't it? That seems to me to give the keynote. Consider. Can you imagine for a moment that a false statement which saves an innocent man's life is a sin? No. Very good, then. It is not the mere liar who is excluded by those words. It is, above all, the sorcerers who use the material life, who use the failings incidental to material life as instruments to obtain their infinitely wicked ends. And let me tell you this. Our higher senses are so blunted, we are so drenched with materialism, that we should probably fail to recognize real wickedness if we encountered it. But shouldn't we experience a certain horror, a terror such as you hinted we would experience if a rose tree sang, in the mere presence of an evil man? We should if we were natural. Children and women feel this horror you speak of. Even animals experience it. But with most of us, convention and civilization and education have blinded and deafened and obscured the natural reason. No, sometimes we may recognize evil by its hatred of the good. One doesn't need much penetration to guess at the influence which dictated, quite unconsciously, the Blackwood Review of Keats. But this is purely incidental. And as a rule, I suspect that the hierarchs of Tophet pass quite unnoticed, or perhaps in certain cases, as good but mistaken men. But you used the word unconscious just now of Keats's reviewers. Is wickedness ever unconscious? Always. It must be so. It is like holiness and genius in this as in other points. It is a certain rapture or ecstasy of the soul, a transcendent effort to surpass the ordinary bounds. So, surpassing these, it surpasses also the understanding, the faculty, that takes note of that which comes before it. No, a man may be infinitely and horribly wicked and never suspect it. But I tell you, evil in this, its certain and true sense, is rare, and I think is growing rarer. I'm trying to get hold of it all, said Cotgrave. From what you say, I gather that the true evil differs generically from that which we call evil? Quite so. There is no doubt an analogy between the two, a resemblance such as enables us to use, quite legitimately, such terms as the foot of the mountain and the leg of the table. And sometimes, of course, the two speak, as it were, in the same language. The rough miner or puddler, the untrained, undeveloped tiger man, heated by a quart or two above his usual measure, comes home and kicks his irritating and injudicious wife to death. He is a murderer, and Gilles de Rais is a murderer. But you see the gulf that separates the two? The word, if I may so speak, is accidentally the same in each case, but the meaning is utterly different. It is flagrant Hobson-Jobson to confuse the two, or rather, It is as if one supposed that Juggernaut and the Argonauts had something to do etymologically with one another. And no doubt the same weak likeness or analogy runs between all the social sins and the real spiritual sins, and in some cases, perhaps, the lesser may be schoolmasters to lead one on to the greater, from the shadow to the reality. If you are anything of a theologian, you will see the importance of all this. "I am sorry to say," remarked Cotgrave, "that I have devoted very little of my time to theology. Indeed, I have often wondered on what grounds theologians have claimed the title of sciences for their favorite study, since the theological books I have looked into have always seemed to me to be concerned with the feeble and obvious pieties, or with the kings of Israel and Judah. I do not care to hear about those kings." Ambrose grinned. "We must try to avoid theological discussion," he said. "I perceive that you would be a bitter disputant. But perhaps the dates of the kings have as much to do with theology as the hobnails of that murderous puddler with evil. Then, to return to our main subject, you think that sin is an esoteric, occult thing?" "Yes. It is the infernal miracle, as holiness is the supernal. Now and then it is raised to such a pitch that we entirely fail to suspect its existence. It is like the note of the great pedal pipes of the organ, which is so deep that we cannot hear it. In other cases it may lead to the lunatic asylum or to still stranger issues, but you must never confuse it with mere social misdoing. Remember how the Apostle, speaking of the other side, distinguishes between charitable actions and charity. And as one may give all one's goods to the poor and yet lack charity, so remember one may avoid every crime and yet be a sinner." "Your psychology is very strange to me," said Cotgrave, "but I confess I like it. And I suppose that one might fairly deduce from your premises the conclusion that the real sinner might very possibly strike the observer as a harmless personage enough?" "Certainly, because the true evil has nothing to do with social life or social laws, or if it has, only incidentally and accidentally. It is a lonely passion of the soul, or a passion of the lonely soul, whichever you like. If by chance we understand it and grasp its full significance, then indeed it will fill us with horror and with awe. But this emotion is widely distinguished from the fear and the disgust with which we regard the ordinary criminal, since the latter is largely or entirely founded on the regard which we have for our own skins or purses. We hate a murderer because we know that we should hate to be murdered, or to have any one that we like murdered. So on the other side we venerate the saints, but we don't like them as well as our friends. Can you persuade yourself that you would have enjoyed St. Paul's company? Do you think that you and I would have got on with Sir Galahad? So with the sinners as with the saints. If you met a very evil man and recognized his evil, he would no doubt fill you with horror and awe, but there's no reason why you should dislike him. On the contrary, it is quite possible that if you could succeed in putting the sin out of your mind, you might find the sinner capital company, and in a little while you might have to reason yourself back into horror. Still, how awful it is, if the roses and the lilies suddenly sang on this coming morning, if the furniture began to move in procession, as in de Maupassant's tale. "I am glad that you've come back to that comparison," said Cotgrave, "because I wanted to ask you what it is that corresponds in humanity to these imaginary feats of inanimate things. In a word, what is sin? You've given me, I know, an abstract definition, but I should like a concrete example." "I told you it was very rare," said Ambrose, who appeared willing to avoid the giving of a direct answer. "The materialism of the age, which has done a good deal to suppress sanctity, has done perhaps more to suppress evil. We find the earth so very comfortable,